Right, thank you very much to everyone for coming to our session on Agro-climatic Safety Nets. Are they adequate and sustainable? And this is a session that was organized by myself and Dr. Kelly Smith from the National Drought Mitigation Center. Our interest in putting this session together was really a realization that there are different approaches that are used around the world to help manage what's increasingly a important challenge with disasters. We heard this morning about, and we've heard in more recent years about issues with things like flash drought, more sustained drought, certainly climate events, and the need to address and manage producer vulnerability to these extreme events has become more important than ever. And so what we wanted to do with this session was to have and go over a range of different experiences and approaches that are used to manage those and help provide those safety nets, and both what has been done and also some evaluation of those approaches in practice and what people have found to be useful. And we also have a range of locations reflected, so we also wanted to show the range that across, we have the U.S., we're going to talk about experiences with disaster and producer safety nets within the U.S. context, as well as a number of experiences in developing country contexts. And so we want to highlight some of those different approaches that are used across the globe. And so we have 4 speakers. Each of those is going to be speaking. We're going to, and I'll provide a brief introduction. There's more information in the program as well. We are going to hold questions unless there's an immediate clarification question that you really feel has to be answered urgently. We're going to hold questions until the end so that we can have more of a discussion that brings together the different pieces of our talk. And so our first speaker is Greg Ibach. Greg is the Undersecretary in Residence at the University of Nebraska's Institute of Agricultural and Natural Resources. He's formerly the Director of the Nebraska Department of Agriculture, Undersecretary for Marketing and Regulatory Programs with USDA, and has a family farm that he and his wife operate and crops and livestock. And so he has a gamut of different experiences related to agriculture and policy, and he's going to be our first speaker. I'll invite Greg up.
Do you want us to sit here after we're done, or wait until Okay, thank you for that introduction, and looking forward to not only the panel, but to the question and answers that you guys come up with, and as we move forward. So I was just going to give for my part, just give a little bit of an overview as to what U.S. and maybe some of the other agricultural producing regions or countries of the world do as far as drought and risk mitigation, or programs that they put forward to be able to deal with that. So I have some experiences from my introduction. You can imagine, from being a farmer myself, I'm very familiar with some of those risk programs that we implement on our farm and ranch and use extensively, not only crop insurance, but also some of the livestock products that are emerging and fairly new now. And then from my experiences at USDA, was involved with some of the rollout of programs during the first Trump administration, where I served as an undersecretary, and then at the Department of Ag in Nebraska, interacted not only with rollout of some of the programs we needed in the 2002 drought time period and the 2012 drought period, worked with the National Drought Mitigation Center with Governor Heineman during that time, and some of the stuff that grew out of that was what I think USDA ultimately now uses the National Drought Monitor as a trigger mechanism. But anyway, maybe just to get into a few of my comments and not get overtimed by rambling too much. The U.S. Has come about, evolved over years with our farm policy, and went from times of trying to control production to what we are still experiencing under Senator Pat Roberts' philosophy of freedom to farm. It still drives, that philosophy still mainly drives our farm programs and our farm bill philosophy. And that really puts power with producers to make their own decisions about what crops they want to plant and how they want to plant that, but provides safety net in the form of different insurance programs that they can utilize, as well as triggered programs that are built into the Farm Bill that are triggered from the National Drought Monitor, many of them. Europe, which would be another major group of countries that participate in agricultural subsidies, they operate more from a philosophy of wanting to maintain lifestyle. Their common agricultural policy puts importance on keeping people on farms and provides payments that incent that they are able to make a living from their farm, and not as much as focused on is specific crop subsidies. They have some disaster programs, they have some risk management programs, but they're not developed in the same way or to the same extent that the U.S. does that. And then South America, which would probably be the U.S.'s main competitor in the production world and producing food that would be exported across all the nations that don't grow as much food, has very limited programs. And they vary greatly from country to country based on the country's economic status and their production of what crops they produce. So countries that produce more specialty crops have less developed programs than Brazil and Argentina that are more in the commodity products. And Brazil has some like a floor that if the market isn't there, they provide assistance to their farmers. Argentina and Brazil both have limited crop insurance programs, mainly tied to the private industry, that they provide some subsidies to the farmers, but really expect the private industry to carry that. And maybe just to highlight, since we're here at the University of Nebraska, how's the National Drought Mitigation Center? We talk about the National Drought Monitor and how important that is to triggering many of the programs that farmers and ranchers depend on. So you don't have to wait for a disaster to be declared, although the Drought Monitor helps USDA decide which counties need to be brought into a disaster declaration and trigger those programs. But they are very important in automatically knowing that there's going to be some assistance for pasture loss, forage losses, just based on what getting to D2 drought status. And so that's an important thing. Also triggers things like ELAP, the Emergency Livestock Program, the Emergency Conservation Program, and others. And so, we'll look forward to discussing this farther in the question and answers. I think some of the panelists have more specific programs that address certain areas of this conversation, and so, but mine was just a kind of an overview. So thank you very much.
All right, well, thank you very much, Greg. And next we have Dan Osgood. Dr. Dan Osgood is the professor and leads the Financial Instruments Division in the, I'm going to get the name wrong, National Center for Disaster Preparedness. Okay, I had to look to get the name right. Which is affiliated with Columbia University. He's worked with approaches to co-developing disaster assistance with people from and communities from around the world. His work has been used in index insurance and other types of approaches. He's has a PhD from Berkeley, which is go Berkeley. We were overlapped a little bit, so we're classmates in that time, and he's going to talk a little bit more about his experience in working with international disaster adaptation. Thanks.
Yeah, so thanks, Ellen. Is this a clicker? Yeah, okay. All right, thanks. And yeah, I just moved institutes, so it actually took me a while to actually get NCDP, National Center for Disaster Preparedness, memorized. I seem to be worse at that with age. So yeah, I think I just realized those fonts are pretty small up there. With age, yeah. So,
Yeah, I had to move into glasses a couple of years ago. That aging process just.
yeah, I think I may have forgotten my glasses somewhere. Okay. So, hopefully I can keep people awake. So climate change is giving us, it's overwhelming the tools that we have so far for managing disasters. And so we need to have unprecedented ways to be able to address and prepare for disasters and I was going to put it on my phone, but it didn't work. Actually, I can see it over there better. We need to have unprecedented ways to be able to respond to it. I think one of the things that has really become evident, and it was one of your first lines, was this power to the producers. If we don't do that, then we're not going to be able to keep making food. And I think the big challenge is that when we, I'm going to have to, I cannot read that enough to hit all my points. Actually, that would help. Yeah, this is the first time that this has happened to me. Yeah, exactly. I know where my readers are. Yeah. So it's the. All right, yeah, here we go. All right, just go up there. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Oh, and this is. I can make that part work. Okay. Yeah. So there we go. Now I'm going to be way over time. But like I said, top-down solutions don't work for the kind of challenges we face now. And we're learning that, and we really have to be very focused on how do we address this new kind of problem, which is this kind of problem where we have the people who know what's going on are in the fields. The experts who are supporting those people connect with them, but are making decisions in office spaces. And there's leadership, and people who have the mandate to make decisions are far. And everyone has to work together. People are competing, people who are have contracts with each other. Everyone has to work together for more sophisticated decision making than we've ever had. And so we need to have decision systems that are much better, not just at saying there's a focus group, oh, I don't like that it's a drought, or I'm vulnerable to rainfall. It's say, okay, if we need to make a tough trade-off, how do we do that in a way that works together? And we do have tools for it, but they're not strong enough. And so one example that I've been, I have to click. You guys have to see the slide too. No, I just, I'd say I'm trying to keep people entertained, but yeah, that would be a lie. So one of the things that I've worked a lot on is insurance. I've been working a lot in southern countries, a lot in Africa, some in Latin America, some in Asia. And so imagine that for many farmers, you have fewer years to get the same amount of food or more food. So basically, you have to be producing more food. Now, the challenge is, as you take the investments and actions to produce more food, you make yourself, ironically, more vulnerable to things like droughts or floods. You know, if I could take out a loan that 4 years out of 5 would give me 30% higher yields, or in many cases in Africa, double my productivity, if this year is a drought and I can't repay the loan, I lose the farm. And this happens to farmers of all scales all around the world. And so if insurance could be something that could pay out that 1 year out of 5 to help me be able to survive that event as a business, then I can do the adaptation, I can increase my productivity. And the challenge with that is that maybe if the season starts late, I could plant late. Or maybe I don't have that flexibility. Or maybe I need new seeds. So if we're going to put the insurance premium to pay out at the times when we most need it, because we never have enough money to go around, we have to target it to when it's most needed, then we have to work through these trade-offs of, can someone plant late? Do they need money to replant? How much? Is it 70-30? Is it 60-40? Both of those added up, I think. You need to have feedback loops that are quantitative to really be able to work that out. And there's been, over the past decades, the kind of parametric insurance I've been working on, where a satellite would trigger a payout, has only been around a decade or two. And if you get that wrong, there's these big problems. A lot of people are left down. And there's been a lot of major disasters policy disasters, where they didn't get the balance right. So another place where I can get it wrong, that I'm entangled deeply, is anticipatory action. And I have to click this, thank you. And with anticipatory action, that's where we work with folks to do seasonal forecasts for drought. So like if because of El Nino and other sea surface temperature things, you can see that there's going to be more likelihood of a drought, that a drought's being forecast, then a country can take actions. And so what this is like insurance. No, it says I'm pressing buttons wrong. Oh, thank you. A country can take action, and they can dedicate funds, or a donor can dedicate funds that get triggered when the forecast is bad. But that's really hard to do because forecasts are uncertain. And so you're making bets on uncertain things. You need to have mechanisms in place to course correct as you get information. Each decision, it's different depending on, for example, if you tell people they're going to have to evacuate, you will regret having people evacuate if the event didn't happen. But if you're just going to make sure they have access to drought-tolerant seeds, you may have less regrets. So each action has different costs, different timelines, and someone who's a climate scientist or atmospheric scientist, an engineer can't make that decision. The other thing is, even if there's been government agreements and policies, international agreements where essentially a grant will get awarded if the forecast reaches a certain level, which we've been entangled in with millions of dollars. The person who's in the government who has been elected with the legal mandate to be responsible for the drought is still responsible, even if they've delegated to that math when they get it wrong, which you will because it's science, not magic, they're still responsible. So there needs to be real co-generation, a real anchoring with what needs to happen on the ground. So there's another issue when you have disasters, short fuse disasters, like a storm or floods. There's a lot of things happening in the government space, but there's also a lot of personal action, a lot of private action. People are making decisions about what to do with their families, where to go, what to do with their houses. And we need to be much better at listening to people when we make our plans so that not everyone goes to the same place, and we know when someone chooses not to go, why they're choosing not to go. Is it because their pet's not allowed on the bus and they don't want to leave their pet behind? It's because they know that they need to do something to keep their house from getting lost. We need to be developing these kinds of things. And there's a lot of projects, especially when you're working in development, where everyone's disappointed by demand because it's not 100% demand and it's not happening in 3 years of the project. But these projects, now, I'm personally entangled in things that began as a couple thousand people, and now there's millions of people around the world. That's more people than I know, more people than I ever know. And if I'm 90% right, there's still a lot of people I've let down. So having people involved in the projects, giving the power to the producers is really critical. And also not just focusing on scale, but on getting things right. It's many of these things that we talk about are like penicillin. You don't want to force everyone to take it because that would be counterproductive. You want to make sure it's available, and the bulk of the effort has to go into figuring out how to diagnose who should be able to get it. So if you really focus, thank you. If you really focus, it's like AI, but smarter. If you really focus on ways to communicate things, to be able to work across these many different scales, often involving thousands or millions of people, you can anchor things on what were some of the bad events and what were a couple specifics about what help you need, like can you replant or not? How hard is it to replant? What were some of the worst years? You can have communications about these. You can communicate with farmers, with scientists, with policymakers, with bankers. And you can cross-check things. If you ask someone what year was bad, carefully, and then you ask them what time of year they're vulnerable, you can cross-check the satellite data and say, was the satellite rainfall low in years they said was bad? And you can find out massive disconnects. You can also find out how to optimize. You can go back and forth. And you can do this through town halls, where we've done thousands of town halls, or our partners have done thousands of town halls, where you're asking these quantitative questions. And I'm going to use 2 fingers, so don't. You can do it through games, where you can say, guess which year your neighbors would have said was a worst year. And you can compare a year where the season started late to one where you had a lot of problems during, let's say, flowering. And then if they can guess better than you, if you can guess better than them, then they can guess about you, you get a prize. And so there's these ways where you can understand what people are doing and get feedback. You can design things and run them by people. And you can also do things where you could ask people to put themselves in other people's shoes when something's really tense. For example, it may be hard to say, if there's a disaster, will you evacuate? But you say, okay, we're going to play a game. Oh, thank you. We're going to play a game, and you're going to be a different kind of player. You could be a pet owner, you could be a student, you could be a homeowner. Here is the disaster message. Do you think other people of your player type will evacuate or not? This is a way to learn about people and to be able to talk about sensitive topics in a way that people might actually be able to talk about. So those are the kinds of things that we've been exploring to see what we can do out of it. I think we've also found, as we do these kind of games, that it's as much about people learning about each other and communicating with each other as people learning about the satellite model, or us learning if the satellite model is wrong or that they won't evacuate. It's about people understanding, oh, everybody wants to go to, for example, this evacuation route. So then people learn, well, maybe I should be looking at other evacuation routes. And so there's this communication, not only top to bottom and bottom to top, but within communities are the kinds of things that I think are really necessary for the future. So I guess I'll wrap up there with my chaotic presentation and give you a laptop back. But hopefully people are a little bit more awake after lunch. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. Claudia Ringler. Dr. Ringler is Director of Natural Resources and Resilience at the International Food Policy Research Institute, or IFPRI. She's worked for 30 years with conducting research on water, food, and ecosystem health with collaborators from all over the world. And I'll also note a little bit of a plug, if make sure you stick around after this session to our keynote Hoyerman session lecture after this, as she will be presenting in that lecture. And so I'll let her take it from here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much for the kind introduction and also for the invitation to this session. I think there are many ways to interpret this title of Agro-climatic Safety Nets, because I was, of course, thinking about safety nets, and are those safety nets supporting resilience and climate resilience? And I guess the main point I'll try to focus on to complement Dan a little bit is, the people matter. I think he made that very clear, but it's also women matter. And it's very difficult, much more difficult to actually support women farmers with any of these climate resilient or agro-climatic safety nets. And the other thing that came to my mind when Karina contacted me was about 9 years ago or so, UNDP approached us and they said, there has been this other disaster in Ethiopia. There was the 2015, 2016 ENSO event. There was a very extreme drought. And they said, the donors are really tired of having to keep paying into these disaster remediation funds. And they said, can you look into what other coping mechanisms or strategies, could be deployed to stop doing this, if they kind of want to graduate everyone and everyone should just be resilient. And our immediate response more or less was, as countries develop, you actually should get more of these safety nets, and you should be providing more support, not less support. And so I'll have a slide a bit later that just states that 52% of the global population is getting some kind of safety net support, not all linked to climate resilience. And most safety nets that exist were not developed to address disasters, but they can be adjusted to be more disaster and climate resilience relevant. I think that's, in fact, my slides are good. So I mean, that's basically the tenet of this short talk, and just going over some work that we have done over the years. So about 10 years ago, we had this question, seasonal weather forecasts, right? So I mean, they're a big thing. We've already heard they're still quite risky. But could they pay off from an economic sense? Because if they pay off, if you get a very good seasonal weather forecast, you maybe don't need any other safety net because you already adjust your farming. You're not going to do anything because a big drought is coming, or you have some water rights, you sell them to someone else who's doing some less water intensive cropping. So then actually you don't need maybe a safety net. And so we did using some economy-wide modeling frameworks, and we found that if we can actually really reach the farmers and if the skill of the forecast is really good, we can generate very high economic benefits. And then maybe you actually don't need to provide any disaster or safety net support to farmers. And obviously the benefit depends on the production systems and also if they export crops, etc. But yes, there's definitely an economic case to be made for providing good seasonal forecasts. But then we did another study, qualitative study in South Africa. They were expecting an ENSO event. It did not happen, but they were like, checking with people with various key informants, the kind of forecasts you're getting, also information about ENSO events. Is it useful? Is it appropriate? And basically, answer was pretty much no to everything. So that's also about 10 years ago, so I hope it has dramatically improved. So what the key informant said, it's the inappropriate temporal and spatial scale of the information. The information doesn't meet the user needs at all. Even there's always this question about probabilities, what does it actually mean? And then there's highly ineffective communication of these forecasts. And obviously no one trusts the weatherman or the weatherwoman. Hopefully there's some weatherwomen these days. And this was a challenge in South Africa, and I think this pretty much sums it up for many other countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And obviously, if we can have the best tools out there, if we can't address those 4 challenges, then we will not reap these economy-wide benefits from providing the forecasts. And this is yet from another study where we asked, women farmers and men farmers, what are your sources of information? Focus was more on climate smart practices, but it also included, information on when to act on implementing climate smart practices. And both women and men, obviously you have different sources of information, but for both internet, and especially for women, internet is either 0 or very low, and also mobile phone is 0 or very low, plus especially in Uganda, women's smartphone ownership, it's really seen as quite negatively. I mean, they're seen as maybe engaging in really bad stuff. And so it's really looked down on, especially in rural areas. So then again, if you want to provide this great information, how do you do it? So in different countries, traditional forecasters in Kenya and agriculture, input providers in Uganda, at least in those districts, those came up as maybe some top sources of information if you actually want to tell them what to do because we have some disaster event or we need to adjust to some drought. We've also looked at index-based insurance and gender, and that was in Bangladesh, and I apologize that Bangladesh is not written here because this is obviously very locale specific. And I think some of the big findings there were, that people obviously have different types of risks at the same time. So climate risk is only one. You might have a death in the family, illness in the family, some very high, education shock. Obviously we've had so many other shocks recently. And so, for them spending, being interested to buy weather index insurance has to be balanced with everything else they need. And so these group savings can complement that. So, basically, okay, the weather insurance can pay for that, and the group saving little account can pay for that. But women often are just more interested in life insurance than in any weather index-based insurance product. And so in this kind of study, they preferred to buy actually life insurance for their husbands because they are considered to be the main breadwinner, rather for them to buy weather insurance for themselves, because also they generally don't own any land. Plus the big challenge, and that's of course, these were similar, some of the studies that Dan explained, you're playing those games and how much would you buy, but then you actually have to go out and see what are they really buying, which is generally very little, much less than in those studies. And obviously because women have less formal education, and their numeracy skills are therefore also, affected. So because of those structural differences between women and men's education access, they often would buy the wrong product once you give this over to the private sector. And that increases the gender gap in resources and achievement, because of course someone who wants to make money as an insurance vendor will go out and obviously will try to sell the product where the insurance vendor, which more often is a man, will maximize his income and obviously minimize the insurance purchaser's income. And then we have a problem here. And so not sure how we can address that. And it's not everywhere the same, but it was certainly is a challenge in Bangladesh. And yes, anticipatory action is yet another safety net opportunity, and colleagues of mine were participating in an anticipatory action study in Adamawa State, I think in 2022. They were pretty sure the flood was coming. And for once, the flood did come exactly as expected. They did have early warning, like whatever, gentlemen and women, I think it was mostly men, went out there and told everyone the flood is coming. And then, some of the households got cash transfers before the flood came and the others after the flood had receded. And then they were looking at, various outcomes, like does it really pay to do anticipatory action? And it didn't pay so much for short-term food security outcomes, but there were a bunch of other important changes that households that had the cash before the floods came were able to undertake. But there is interestingly, no significant difference in subjective well-being, but that's one of those things you have to come back after 5 years and actually see the longer-term impacts of such anticipatory cash. But as I think Dan also said, it can be very challenging to actually implement it. This time it worked, probably half the times it will not work for various reasons, including bad forecasts. And then just to end, as I mentioned before, there is a lot of social assistance out there and a lot of social protection out there, but currently it's not geared towards climate resilience, but some things can be done to improve that. That also includes school feeding, asset generation, cash transfers, also transfers that are, might already be linked to disasters. And the question, like if you really want to improve the resilience of the most marginalized populations, you have to focus on women and girls while doing that. And then how can that be done? So the traditional social protection or social assistance approaches, either cash transfer or asset transfer, they can already strengthen households' resilience, but they haven't generally been developed to do that. They have been developed because those people are very poor and they just can't make a living. And maybe with some training or different timing of these transfers, you can actually strengthen climate resilience. Then you can be more, being more intentional and try to focus on improving, using these transfers and support to help farmers adapt, adapt to adverse events and climate change. And then there again, so some assessments have been done. For example, even the Productive Safety Net program in Ethiopia very clearly, even when there is no climate intentional additional payments, as they have done during the last ENSO event, they could show that households with these payments were much more climate resilient than the households that do not get those payments, which is also probably not surprising. There's much less known to what extent you can use social assistance programs to support climate mitigation. So you probably have then to be quite intentional. Maybe some tree seedlings, add some elements that can actually also improve mitigation. So yeah, just to close, I think it's very important to consider all types of safety nets, also what's already out there. Where can you, where can you tweak an existing program rather than starting something completely new? Digitalization is the talk of the day. But we really know that this will, today, at least for the Global South, increase gender inequities. And bundling these programs with training, and training can be exactly, how do you, what are some routes if you have to leave the area, or what are some off-farm employment opportunities. We know that men are much more likely to leave agriculture when disaster strikes, because they're more mobile and because they have other structural advantages, such as better education, so they can leave agriculture. So again, what can we do for women to also have some of these opportunities? And then finally, we really need to balance, the various goals. Most of the social assistance programs are for poverty reduction and not for climate resilience. Some of those payments can actually reduce climate resilience, depends on how they're being used. So again, I think it's very important to finally, support programming that actually supports all three outcomes: women's empowerment, sustainability and resilience, but also poverty reduction. Thanks. Thank you. That's it. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Lots of great food for thought to think. And all right. So our last speaker before we get to the questions today is Dr. Petra Schmitter. Dr. Schmitter is a researcher, principal researcher for the International Water Management Institute and leads the research group on climate mitigation and adaptation pathways. Her research focuses on suitable water solutions for smallholder farms and looking at approaches for managing risk and scaling those solutions to different scales. I'll let her take it from here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks for the introduction. I'm actually going to present an example for Zambia, which was done with colleagues of mine. So just to say up front that I'm presenting somebody else's super cool research, but don't ask too many technical details to me on this matter. So we heard a lot of overarching presentations in this session so far, and we wanted to deep dive a little bit on how do we really develop a early warning, early action, early finance platform to help make those decisions for a specific country. And the case here at the moment and is being presented today is the one on Zambia, but the tool is actually already being scaled at the moment to Senegal, Pakistan, Mali, and we're in discussion with several other countries as well. It's called the AWARE platform, and it receives financing from the World Bank as well as the CGAR internal financing programs. The El Nino droughts in Zambia have really vast detrimental impacts, not only in terms of agriculture production, but really on livelihoods. So that was a bit of the starting point when the team started looking at, okay, but what are the actual impacts that these droughts and the severity of these droughts are causing? On one hand, you have them not only on agriculture and the vast declines in production and yield, but also in terms of energy, because there's a lot of renewable energy in the country, which is dependent on the amount of water that's being available in the dams, right? So if there is a drought, there is no water, and therefore there's no hydropower. So that's another very important one. And man, I think I need glasses as well. Starting to get, this is getting very small. Yeah. No, but it's fine. So we looked at the amount of people being impacted. We had 5.8 million people. And we actually estimated it was $1.4 billion that it was costing the government in this particular case. So together with the government of Zambia, we co-created then a platform saying, okay, what are the Earth observation data that we can use? What are the indices, not only from a meteorological drought perspective, but also from agricultural and hydrological drought perspective, that are important to actually make decisions on for all these different sectors. And so there were a number, but just a few here are mentioned as SPI and VCI. And then, of course, as Dan already mentioned, it's not only about having a good forecast and having that at the right resolution and at the right time, but also like how do you provide then recommendations for that for these different sectors. So that's where it's early warning, early action, and then early financing modules that were co-created with the different sectors in the country, and where we then looked at what alerts do we need also at different locations, because within a country, you have so many different sectors being important in different parts of the world. So we looked at central, eastern, and southern provinces specifically. Now, some of the impact of having that access to that digital information in the right way was that it not only helped to inform the government, but also the humanitarian organizations already to get prepared. And there were a number of actions actually that followed from those forecasts. So on one hand, we had the drought tolerant seeds already mentioned. I mean, there was a clear action here about the dissemination of drought tolerant seeds, but also borehole drilling. So there was a massive effort in a very short amount of time where 900 households in a specific location were given access because of the drought, and so that they could start producing their own production. Then there was a promotion much more widely, regionally, on climate smart farming practices, and then the farmers actually started shifting, right? So to be less dependent on rain-fed agriculture, they started looking at winter cropping. So you also saw crop diversification, crop shifts happening with the early information. So yeah, my presentation is really, really short. It was just some of the learnings from implementing such a platform, which is, it often sounds cool, but then when you start getting down to having everybody around the table, it's much more complex than you start imagining. So it actually helped breaking down the silos across the different sectors, because everybody was affected, but in different ways. It helped actually also the scalability and the alignment with the global frameworks. So, you know, that's really, it's tested in Zambia and in Senegal, but it's really scaled now with Africa, also with Digital Earth Africa being involved and so on. But there's still a lot of challenges. I mean, we heard about resolutions, timely forecasts, but it's also about how do you look at multi-season droughts, how do you integrate different artificial intelligence and learning, not only about getting better forecasts, but also about translating it into better information and timely information. And how do you integrate these tools within national, of course, disaster risk management frameworks. So far, a short presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. This is a great start to our conversation. Thank you, everyone. It was a great start to our conversation. I'd like to open this up to questions from the audience, if there's any general questions, or and there will be a microphone coming to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all the panelists. It's interesting because I'm as government as it gets. So I'm on my military side. I'm a agricultural officer for the U.S. Army. On my civilian side, I work for the USDA. And we realized in this conference how small the ag world is, because I work for Undersecretary Ibach with the National Organic Program. So it's a small world. It's great to see familiar faces. So I have more of an observation than a question. So every year, there's a foreign delegation that brings academia, industry representatives, as well as ministry-level ag from different parts of the world. And every year, me and my colleague give a presentation about U.S. programs for risk management, right? And we talk about the programs like crop insurance. They're in the Farm Bill every year, as well as the ad hoc programs that, you know, they get implemented as a response to disasters. And I always get the same feedback from the audience. And this audience gets it. And they're extremely sharp from all over the world. I got Asia, like, as a matter of fact, in a week, I'll be doing this for the African delegation. And they always look at us and say, this is exactly what we need. But then they see the price tag. I mean, this is like tens and tens of billions of dollars every fiscal year. And it's this realization that this is not within reach. And going to Claudia's comment, you're right. The more a country develops, the more money needs to be allocated into these programs. So my question to the group is, what are the tools that you can use in that transition? Because you cannot, they are within reach to these farming communities in this country. You don't have the budgets that developed nations have, but you know that's the right path. But in between, what do you do? What recommendations do you have? Thank you.
Great question. Who wants to take it first?
I mean, I think, Dan, you mentioned parametric insurance. Yeah.
So I guess I'll answer. So I think the point that we're working on a budget is really you really notice it when you're working in southern countries and developing countries. I think, you know, it came up once when we were talking about the resources for some of the French-speaking countries, and that, you know, France has something like $7 billion that they spend on their farmers, and that's like 500,000 farmers. And probably France is part from the European Commission, and they get something like, I say they're about a fifth of the contributions to that. So they're getting from other countries billions of dollars of resources, and that's much more than the rest of the world gets. And so we're working with much fewer resources. And I think when we work on things like anticipatory action or insurance, where we're trying to say, where do you put that first dollar where it has the biggest impact? And it's always this really hard Charlie Brown choice, where there's other things that need the money, but you're targeting the thing that needs it the most. And I think that's also where, as someone who's helping to design these things and also helping elected officials who they have to face up to, that people, the dollar is only going to where it's most needed, not to what other people also very badly need. I think these processes where we do have, that are driven by farmers, science-based, are really critical. And so we do a lot of things with these insurance projects, but the insurance projects, it's always about that most important gap. And you don't sell insurance for something, you don't cover anything that you could cover any other way, whether it's through the family savings, through changes in agricultural practices. It's always about figuring that out. And that's about discussion and planning. And we can't train anyone how to do it. They have to work with us, kind of like when you're working with an architect. They can't tell you how many toilets you want in your house. I would go for a lot, personally. But I think the key things, as we talk about the digitalization of ag and some of the things that the other panelists were discussing, is we need ways to communicate information, not just to push technologies on people, but to really design things where you're targeting the things that with a bit of thought and a bit of consensus, you can really nail and get some things on.
Maybe just to add, I mean, so Ethiopia is obviously one of the poorest countries, but they have had this highly successful productive safety net program. It's a social safety net program. It wasn't started because of climate risks. It's because of just plain poverty. And there's some people who just cannot, I mean, obviously, they can't even reach everyone because it was even started mostly for the crop areas, not for pastoralist areas. But so my suggestion is you check what you already have, and then you tweak it to make it, responsive to droughts. And that's what they did in this last ENSO event. So by the way, that last event was, I think, pretty much as bad as the previous one they had in, when was that, 2000 or? No, before. Anyway, there was a very...
There's a big one in 2009.
Yeah, okay.
2015.
Even before.
I got in trouble in 2009.
No, so maybe 1984. So anyway, they had
97 was a big one, and 84
84.
was the famous one.
Exactly. So there was the famous one, was, infamous one, where a lot of people died. And so the 2015 one, very severe, but the people did not die because of these programs. And so the donors put more money into the existing program, so that was much faster to reach people, because the mechanism was already there. So I would just check what's out there. How can you, with very little money, strengthen what's already out there instead of coming in with completely different programs? And obviously, first, really, as he also said, check are actually the poor benefiting, right? Because there's a lot of programs where the poor don't benefit. And there's also, yes, there's never money, but then, governments still put out money for, very unproductive stuff, like fertilizer subsidies. It's productive for one season, but it's not productive for growing your stock of research and capital and actually getting your productivity going in a longer term. So can you repurpose some of that through direct payments, to the poorest farmers? So, yeah, I think a lot can be done, but certainly you shouldn't come with this is the tool, and where's my country? You have to say, this is the country. What could actually make a difference at low cost? So, yours.
Yeah, I think that the challenge in comparing like what U.S. and Europe and even some of the South American countries do to what Africa needs is it's apples and oranges, because in the developed agricultural areas we are only buying insurance products that protect against a financial disaster, maybe 65-75% of what we expect to take as income. And because we have established farmers and ranchers that can absorb some of that. So when you're looking at Africa where you're, you know, one bad year and they're sunk, or, you know, it's a whole different, it's more of a challenge to figure out how you maintain that operation from year to year. And then, you know, usually a farmer that is needing to, is operating on limited resources, the first thing to go is insurance. And they think, well, this is something that I hope I don't have to rely on, so I'm not going to buy it. And then, you know, they have a disaster, and then they're in real trouble.
Thank you, all the panelists, for the presentations. I would like to collect a little bit of what each of you talk about. Formulate my question. It is related with traditional knowledge and how traditional knowledge can help your enterprises, right? Your actions and activities in the field and the development of products to perhaps making them more affordable, build bottom up, and they also provide the access to women and more, let's say, proactive access, and also, why not, come up as a safety net for other activities across the world, I would say. But what do you think about the traditional knowledge, in particular indigenous knowledge? That would be probably my question.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, we have done some studies to understand traditional methods to predict, for example, precipitation events, etc. So that, yeah, it's very important, and it's true that was, you know, what's coming, what they see through maybe television or radio or whatever, that, you know, these knowledge systems are not usually supported, and that's a big problem. So strengthening traditional knowledge systems is essential. But at the same time, now, I mean, I've been working in Kenya for like 20 years on climate change topics, climate extreme events, adaptation, and definitely, you know, over those years, every time I go back and they say it's worse, it's you know, now like we absolutely can't predict. We don't know anymore when it's going to rain. The seasons have 100% changed. We don't know when to plant. So even these traditional systems are unfortunately getting overturned sometimes. So they're not as useful anymore and for some things. I'm not saying for everything, but to really help farmers decide when they should be doing what. So some of those traditional knowledge systems are not working as well anymore. But you saw in my slide traditional forecasters or whatever, or traditional elders and so forth are still the main source of what to do about climate change. So for many rural areas across Africa, so they're still certainly relied on. It's just the question is how much they can help you nowadays. So that's a bit of the challenge. And so I guess the goal is to marry those two systems. How the traditional systems can be strengthened and complemented with modern systems. I think that's where we need to go. And again, because I think too much support still comes with a preconceived notion, and that's why a lot of that is not being done. And of course, it's very costly. And different traditional leaders and elders, it would require also quite a few resources to do that. It's different from that digitalization. Yeah.
Actually had a test on that in Ethiopia. In this case, it was flood forecasting. It was not about drought. It was flood forecasting, and working with the different villages to actually marry the local knowledge with what was coming out of the forecast. And it was actually important not only to help validate whether the forecasts were okay, but also to build trust in what to do with the information. So the villages that were actually involved in this whole citizen science / forecasting process were much faster to take action and a much larger scale than when we didn't engage the whole citizen science component of that flood forecasting. So it clearly has an advantage, not only
in terms of improving and validating forecasts, but also in terms of anticipatory action. Absolutely.
Yeah, and to echo some of that, I'll stand up to stay awake because I'm talking. Yeah, so to echo that, of course, one obvious thing I want to shout out is most of our seasonal forecast technology comes from ENSO, El Nino, which is traditional knowledge, which drives most of the solutions we have now. I think it's critical that you engage with the communities and learn from them for the solutions. And whether that's traditional knowledge or just knowledge or their own choices, every time that we've done it, we see that's the difference between success and failure. Like with insurance, if we engage the community in a quantitative design, co-design way, like we're really designing things together, which we can do thousands of villages easily, then we have usually overwhelming demand. If we don't, no one wants to buy the product. It's always very clear. And I also want to say that we get, and it's probably because also they know how to use it as a tool and integrate it into the other things they're doing. I also have to say, like in Zambia, the Zambian government went to 1,000 villages, had focus group meetings, talked broadly about things, but came also out with very quantitative parameters of when they needed the coverage and ways to verify that. And they did this mostly in less than a month. And the direct outputs of the village meetings gave better satellite models on rainfall than anyone had ever developed. Any expert, any AI, and we finding that repeatedly, is that when you work directly with the people who should be benefiting from the thing, they know how to do it better than us, and we're just there to help them. And so I think there's the traditional knowledges of, like saying, if you look at this animal, or this is a way of understanding the drought's coming, that's very important. But just this, what was it again? Power with the producers. It's people know how to solve problems if we act as the experts supporting them in their decision making and supporting their elected officials and government experts. But I think that's central to this success in these kinds of things.
I think for the online,
Hi. So I thought that these presentations were really, really nice, and I think that they marry really, really well together. I'm curious the role that faith-based organizations play in the community engagement, the dissemination of information. I know that the trust in the information. So I'm just kind of curious what your guys' experiences are with, faith-based organizations.
That's huge. Again, we could bring up the slide, but faith-based organizations were a very big source of information on climate smart agriculture or climate change, what you should be doing. So both, more traditional, from traditional religious leaders, but also the more common or well-known religions. And it's also particularly important for women's empowerment and equity. So there's now quite a bit of research has been done in Mali, Niger, etc., directly working with imams to actually improve, work with them to support equity in family life, because at the end of the day, everyone wants the same outcomes for children and for healthy families, and to basically work with them to support families to distribute some of the labor burden more equally, with the overall goal of healthier families and healthier children and more prosperous families. So actually quite a bit of work is being done, so directly working through church leaders in rural areas, and not maybe directly on a disaster mitigation side. I know less, but I'm sure that the church bells can ring and other things. I'm sure that they are certainly part of other disaster reduction systems. But yeah, they definitely have to be, they are part of the solution, and it's very important to actually work with them and not, around them or trying to promote things that will not go through as long as they go against existing religious beliefs. So yeah, I think it's very important to bring them in.
Yeah, some of the projects that I'm familiar with is working with the university here, very much tied to those religious organizations, the leading religions in those countries, especially in Africa. They're people that they trust and rely on to give them reliable information, whether it be faith-based or not. And so and they trust those organizations more than they do government organizations or businesses in that local community. And so if you have a tie to the religious organization, it's a good way to disseminate your information and feel that the people are going to trust that it's coming from somebody that their elders have chosen to work with.
Yeah, and I think, so having a lot of the community leadership involved in these community discussions and decision making is important, and religious leaders play a big part in that. I think one thing about the point about traditional knowledge is that much of the traditional knowledge is connected to the religious organizations and community, and lots of times the holidays or things like that will contain, like what they celebrate on a holiday will have something to do with the way the rains work, and so that kind of thing is often extremely valuable in understanding. I think that's part of how folks in a community know what happened 15 years ago on a Thursday in July. Has to do with these religious organizations and some of that connection with traditional knowledge in the holidays.
So I guess earlier I had a side conversation with the department chair for the ALEC department, so agriculture, leadership, education, and communication. And he was interested in looking at capacity building among pastoral imam communities. And is that, I guess, how feasible would that be? Or how open do you think that community would be to like learning, to building agricultural education into the schooling that they already kind of receive to get to where they are in their communities?
I think these having these kind of capacity building connected to religious organizations and the different communities is something that is possible, and in many cases. I think one thing about working with local religious organizations is you do have to understand often things very well, and what the conflicts are, who's included, who's excluded, and that is a sophisticated thing. It's something that you have to be aware of in any case, and that I'm often blind to. But I do think that there's a lot of space for including these kinds of education in the religious communities.
This is Ali with Lindsay Corporation. So my question is most of you have worked with rural communities in Africa. what role age plays in the adoption of decision-making tools which you guys work on and try to introduce to that community. One preconceived notion is usually the young people, they are more tech savvy, so we could assume that they will be more receptive to those new tools. So what are your thoughts on that?
I have an anecdote, is that when we were first trying out some of these phone games, where we weren't sure if we would get garbage out of just having people play the games, we thought maybe it's just going to be kids or taxi drivers playing phone games. This was in Colombia, the country where we did the first pilot, and the test was, how well can you guess what your neighbors would say is, the worst year out of a pair of years, as compared to your neighbors. So who's the best at that? And we mixed in some satellite questions too. And the people who won the game was a 16-year-old on her phone playing with her grandmother. So there was, and we have a lot of sort of, I say we study these things, we ask questions about them, about people's age as they use these different things. What my sense is one is that we have to be prepared to be surprised, but two is that there's going to be different people who dominate in different kinds of discussions, and so a community discussion, especially one that focuses, that's pulled together based on community leadership, either civil or religious, is probably going to include more of those voices, and that phones and technology may include voices from different folks. But again, every time we look into this, we find several surprises.
Just quickly, so that, yes, so yeah, I mean, wherever we are, somehow the younger people are better with these digital devices. It's certainly the same in my family. The challenge is that in low, maybe this presumably the same here, in low-income countries, the situation is that they don't own the land, and they don't have the resources generally, to act upon this. And so what they can do then is, work as farm advisors, extension systems, and provide various services, but they generally cannot make a difference on their own farm because they don't own a farm at that age. So we have these three ages. We have the eldest farmers. They generally don't want to change much. Then we have the medium age, so they're not as good in the digital systems, but they're actually still willing to experiment and make changes. So those are the more likely that will eventually make a change. And then we have the younger ones who like the tools, but they don't have the farm. And so, yeah. So basically, if you can somehow marry the three and make a difference that way, right? That the younger talk to the middle-aged and the elder one, yeah. I mean, generally they're often less inclined to make differences. But again, I'm sure he has some anecdotes.
It's obvious. I'm itching to tell it. So we were working in Ethiopia on some of these insurance projects, having some of the earlier focus group meetings as we were trying to hone the system. It was like 2009 or something, and we were talking to the farmers, and we were thinking, could we even tell this isolated group that they would get payouts based on a satellite? Do they even know what a satellite is? And so we were having this focus group meeting in northern Ethiopia, and we tried to explain, you can see them sometimes in the sky, and they look at the clouds and try and decide, try and estimate if it's raining. And this old man, he was a priest, and he got up and he said, "Look, I'm just an old man, a simple farmer, a priest, and I just don't understand about these satellites in the sky when they see rainfall. I've heard sometimes they fall out of the sky, and I wonder, will I get my payment?" And he was the first person in the entire project of all the engineers and government folks who had brought that up. And yes, that very year, the satellite product we were using was discontinued. So these are the kinds of surprises that I can't stop from talking about when I have a microphone.
I think some of the issues worldwide are the same that we experience here, though, in the United States, and the brain drain is real. Kids are either encouraged not to come back to the farm, or they see higher and better use monetarily for their time and efforts in education by going somewhere else. And so figuring out how to encourage them that farming and agriculture is a good way of life, and you know, there's more, sometimes the benefits are more than monetary, their lifestyle and family considerations as well. And so that is why not always can you rely on the younger generation to bring the technology back, because the ones that are trained in the technology maybe have left the community to go to a different occupation.
I have a question while I'm, one of the things that I was thinking about, and I was particularly thinking about this with Petra's talk, but there's other aspects across all of these, and thinking about what is the cost, with designing these, what is the cost of being wrong? I was thinking, for example, about the case where there's hundreds of families invested in these solar boreholes. And in that case, yes, I mean, the assessments were correct. It was absolutely the right decision to make, and it helped. But my sense is that people are not very willing to have those things go wrong very frequently before they really start pushing back. And so my question is, how much is that a part of the way you think about designing systems, and how does that build, you know, how does that get built into the system?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. But I think in this particular case, it's not that we were saying, oh, you have to go out and drill boreholes, and oh, you have to go out and provide drought-tolerant seeds, right? It was a ministry, well, it was an interministerial decision of where they would put their financing towards, right? What they believe were their top priorities in terms of, okay, when the drought hits, what do we want to have in place? Because the cost of inaction is going to be bigger than the cost of action, right? And that's kind of where they said, okay, let's do this. And also because those boreholes, I mean, let's be honest, they have multi-purpose use. It's not that they're only going to be used now because a drought is triggered, right? They're going to be used to spearhead a lot of agricultural production going down the road. So it was a dual win-win at the moment, so.
No, I think that's so. What I often have to do is when a project goes well, I don't have to visit, but my job is often to visit the least happy village of the project. If you get it 90% right, and then you have 100,000 people in the project, you got to go talk to those people who are the least happy. And I think there's a huge price in getting it wrong, at least when you have to do that. And that's why it's so important that we communicate with people that this is science, not magic, and that we don't have magic solutions, and that these are all trade-offs. I think in anticipatory action and also in insurance, what you want to do is you want to try and design it so the cost of getting it wrong is as low as possible. And you also want to communicate to people. So you can, one thing, if you only involve the climate scientists in designing triggers and things, you miss the opportunity. You can redesign your actions to say, oh, let's look at the historical years. Here's where the forecasts would have gotten it right. These are the years we would have wanted to act. What would we have done in these years if we had gotten the forecast wrong or too late or something like that? How could we have course corrected? Let's build that course correction into these projects. And for both insurance and for anticipatory action, there's this, well, across them, there's this movement to try and say, let's integrate our tools and see how much we can get done earlier and make sure that we have something in place to, by the end of the year, by the time everything's said and done, we've addressed the issues, the remaining issues. And so trying to make it more focused on how far ahead of the ball can we be, as opposed to did we get it right? And that's, again, where if we just use one tool, that tool is not going to do the job. And we need to say, how do we set this up? And it's got to be this kind of really engineering. The interfaces have to work. The plugs have to have the right number of pins. It's really that kind of work that needs to be done. And even when we're talking with the farmers themselves, they're making their own decisions, or they're working with their families and their communities. And if they don't have the kind of information about, just like with a nitrogen is good for solving some problems, but it's not going to solve others. If they don't know that, they can't use nitrogen, And so what we've found is that if you spend a lot of time telling people about the holes in the products that you're making, you do specific trainings about the holes in the products, people are more likely to adopt them. And so I think that you have to lead with what the problems are and what are the things. Penicillin doesn't cure most diseases. But the ones that it can address, it's very helpful to say, okay, you would have had maybe in the past 10 years 3 droughts that would have been really problematic. What if we could whittle that down to 1 drought? And the more that we can do that, the better off we are. But having said that, it's really hard to get it right, and getting it wrong has real consequences. And when we talk about things like penetration and scale, the responsibility increases as we scale, and it's something that, how do you say, it's a weight that we carry as our projects go to scale, even though they're disappointing scales for a lot of people. It's getting it right is an important thing.
Hello. Okay. Hello. I was just wondering what the relationship between physical infrastructure are available, like canals, wells, and that sort of thing, and the demand for crop insurance is. Can you kind of characterize that?
I don't know whether I'm going to answer the question, but on the demand side, but on the cost side, I think, access to, a secondary source than just rain-fed definitely reduces the risk, so it makes it more affordable. In Nebraska, we have lots of irrigation, so we're one of the highest crop insurance as far as percentage of farmers that enroll in crop insurance, because it's usually fairly economical to purchase here. And so I think that probably is more driver of whether or not people use it, is because the cost is going to be lower because the risk is to be actuarially sound is less.
That's the same story from small villages in Ethiopia was this mix between insurance. When people have irrigation, I mean, irrigation's awesome. It can do a lot. There's some issues that the irrigation may not deliver for you, but usually those are, in Africa at least, such big scale events that the government's stepping in. But what we saw when we were looking at insurance in areas that had irrigation is that people, like you were saying, had multiple crops with multiple sources of income. And so they were using some of their non-irrigated land to try and raise money right before they were going to plant in their irrigated land. And so if they had a drought, they didn't have as many inputs for the irrigated season. And so if we designed an insurance thinking they didn't have irrigation, we would have gotten it wrong. But thinking about how to use the insurance as a way to target that specific part of the agriculture so that they could leverage their irrigation appropriately, that's where these things seem to work. So again, it's things that if you live there, in hindsight, it's obvious, but if you're just sitting looking at a map of the world, you would never think of.
I think we might have time for one last question. Arindam, is there anything online? Okay. Any last? I see one final question. Francisco?
Because it's an interesting topic when you see irrigation comes as a subsidy of water deficits. But what happens when you have floods, right? And that's where even Nebraska and many other places in the Midwest, like we remember 1993, there was no insurance or subsidy for that event. So any final thoughts about when you have these two, let's say, sides of the spectrum of extreme event?
Yes, that was obvious enough that I didn't think of it. We often find that insurance is attractive for floods, even for people who have irrigation. But also, you know, irrigation systems, especially big ones, are for managing water. And so if you have a little bit of insurance carefully built into the mix, you can better manage everything. But it's really hard to manage things well, so.
So, you know, some of the insurance, it's yield protection, so you're insuring against your average yield, or revenue protection, and so you're insuring about having a consistent revenue source. And so I think even floods would be covered in both of those. And then multi-peril is your base insurance that, you know, you name it, an insect infestation would be covered in a multi-peril as well.
Okay, well, thank you. And I think I just heard a comment that I think summarizes some of the discussion. It's really hard to manage it well. And so I think that's one of the takeaways. And I think we've gotten a lot of context and suggestions and experience about what things actually do work to manage things well. And so thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to everyone for coming to the session, and look forward to continued interaction during the next few days.